Hello and welcome to This Is Your Life Path, a podcast where I sit down with tabletop game designers and we have a chat about all of the things that have influenced and inspired them away from the tabletop world. I'm your host Kayla, I'm a game designer myself and I publish as Ratwave Gamehouse. I do games all about connection and alienation. I recently released 30 Foes, or Once Again We Are Defeated, a storytelling / map making game inspired by Seven Samurai. You tell the tale of a group of cosmic cowboys wielding divine power, trying to defend a village against a 30-strong bandit army. You draw and interpret cards to build individual locations, negotiate with fellow players about how effective your character's preparations and defenses for this place are going to be, and then you flip coins to determine how the attack will go and play out those scenes, where you'll always have the option to let fate go as it fell, or sacrifice your own life to try and give this village more of a fighting chance. The game is available on ratwavegamehouse.itch.io. This episode is the second half of a two-part interview with Tanya Floaker, the creator of The Connection Machine, Be Seeing You, and Lo Thy Dread Empire. Our episode sort of ran long, so I have split it into two halves. We jumped just sort of straight into the episode because I didn't know I was going to split it when I was doing the recording. But the first episode, which is already out and you can go back and listen to if you haven't already, I think it's a really great one, focuses on Tanya's life and specific influences from there, more broader questions, while this episode is sort of detailed, targeted questions around some of Tanya's games and the influences there. Also, we took a break in the middle of recording and then came back after a couple weeks. You'll see when that happens. With all that said and done, let's jump straight into the episode where we're mid-chat about The Connection Machine. I had some more specific questions about The Connection Machine, but I did think it might make sense for the audience if you were willing to give like the pitch of what the game's about, because I realise I've
Yeah, okay, so it's a bit of a weird pitch, okay, but that's why you do these weird indie games that aren't going to be like 300-page hardcovers. Effectively, the premise of the game, the sort of science fiction gloss over it, is that 42 years in the future, a supercomputer has been created called the Connection Machine. The Connection Machine is tasked with creating and maintaining a stable hypercube, a four-dimensional space that humans would be able to enter into and explore and interact with and then come back out of. So that's the idea from this comes then that when humans actually get into the hypercube, our brains are only wired to work on a three-dimensional model. Okay, and so already in our own day-to-day lives, without any sci-fi, our brains do a lot of filling in for us. Like there's no wavelength for the color magenta. That's a creation of our brains to deal with a certain circumstance that it comes across, or that when we have after images in our eyes, we see Stygian blue, which isn't an actual blue, but our brain interprets as a blue to fill in the gaps to make it make sense. So when humans get into this four-dimensional space, there's lots of gaps, and they start filling in your brain start filling it in with what it knows, and it starts bringing out sort of like a lot of the sort of underlying sort of feelings and attachment and past traumas that the people going into that space have brought with them, and it manifests them in front of them. And in its most sort of like violent or confrontational forms, these form as what, and this is a phrase from a song, as PTSD demons, which are there as sort of like these manifestations of past trauma that as the characters explore the hypercube, they come across time and time again, and they come across the memory of the last encounter they had with them. So you'll run across your own characters as NPCs, going through the motions of what had happened in the previous scene, but then you're coming into it again and there'll be details changed because it'll be surreal and you don't have to keep it exact, and things will happen in a sort of dreamy. There's not a things aren't consistent properly, and they're trying to deal with these memories and this repeating cycles of sort of embodied past, and then trying to integrate with them so that they can escape the hypercube before it collapses.
Yeah, it's a hugely interesting concept. It's so you mentioned the PTS demons there as well, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
a game that does engage very heavily with a lot of mental health concepts. Attachment styles are a part. Your stats are like emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. There are
Mm-hmm.
definitely other things I could be using as examples. And I was wondering
Yeah.
about your experiences with these concepts and I guess how you went about bringing
Yeah.
that to a game in a way that was, and I put this in quotation marks and we can, I guess, bandy around the term and
Yeah.
figure out what we mean with it, but in a way that was safe.
Yeah. Yeah. We will come back to safe because I think that's a really good word to pivot on. But basically, I guess I like of like the sort of like the if things that had happened in my life previously, it's like being a closeted youth, trying to unpick all that, um, dealing with like being quite firm in my ideas of gender, but of sexuality, but that sort of defense of that muddying my ideas around gender for a long time, and then also dealing with like losing my home at one point to a disaster, and being homeless, and yeah, a lot of different things that happened in my life led to I'd had counselling a few times, and I had to have counselling just after my youngest child was born because we were homeless just before and just after they were born.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And yeah, we're more solid now, but that at that point there'd been a big anyway. Yeah, so I went through counselling at that point, and actually when that round of counselling was coming towards a close, we were talking about where I would go. Like once my youngest was a bit older, I was like talking about retraining, and I didn't want to be just doing tech support when I go back to work. I didn't want to just be doing call center work or office work or science work. I wanted to do something else, and I sort of bandied about the sort of ideas I was having at the time. And my counsellor, one of the few times she ever sort of said something pretty ha- like, have you done this? Is like, have you actually thought of becoming a counsellor? And I hadn't. I said, no, it was kind of surprised me. And then, but it clicked right away with me. Um, and so I've been making it like in the midst of uh, global pandemic. That's a bit of a redundant term, global pandemic. Anyway, in the midst of it all, just got started trying to get qualified. So I've done sort of introductory courses. I'm currently doing an HNC equivalent. I hope to do. I'm hoping to either do a diploma or there's a postgraduate course that I've got my eyes on. That after which I could go into practice as a counsellor, and that's my goal. And so as I was doing that, I was also doing lots of reading around about it. I was reading and also like watching lots of like counselling podcasts and videos, and reading books, and just sort of building up my knowledge, and sort of also putting into context, doing lots of reflective work on my own self, like finding like going into more depth into some of the things that I'd worked with previously. And so all these concepts are floating about my head, and the way that my brain sort of works, it's all bubbling away in the background on 20 different channels, like a cacophony of background noise. And then out from that somewhere comes like a coherent game. And it's just literally digging a hole in my garden, and had to stop to take some notes because I was like, this is a game. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I'd been like looking into trauma informed counselling. I've been looking into things like psychosocial models of counselling, and also sort of things that um, take into account the fact that some things can't be changed, or some things are superstructural, and we have to to work out how to survive within them. And
Mm.
I was, but also like you mentioned the PTSD demons. That's a line from a song called from a track called Sertraline Gang, which is sort of talking about yeah, it's talking about like taking antidepressants and being transgender, and dealing with that sort of like that what that means. Okay,
Mm.
so it's like yeah, and it's also not a downer of a song, despite its sort of subject matter. It's talking about it in the way that people live with things, and I was like, yeah, and so I just heard that, and then as I was designing it, it's just like that has to be a thing here, and this, it wasn't even like this has to be a thing. What will the thing be? It was just like this is what this thing is. I knew right away, and
Yeah.
that's kind of
The engagement to me, it does also strike me. It doesn't feel like it feels like it takes things. The connection machine, because I believe I read through the latest document available.
mm,
It takes concepts seriously. It treats its characters
yeah,
seriously, but I don't think it
yeah,
feels like. I don't think the game feels like a downer. I don't think it's
no,
like
no,
trauma, this crushing thing that is over. It feels more like it feels to
it,
me almost like a an argument for developing an understanding and the power of that.
yeah. I think what it's good at is it like on one dimension of its sort of creation, it's a party of adventurers go into a weird dungeon and try and beat it, right, or try and survive it. Like there's a little bit of like that early set that sort of 70s role play game ethos in there if you squint at it a little bit. Um, and it's fictional. It takes like some of it's like a bit quantum leapy. Okay, it isn't all mass surrealism. You like your characters have stepped into the quantum leap generator and they want to make the final leap home. Um, but and at the same time, it's got these bigger concepts, but they're put through a science fiction lens. So it isn't just like, hey, let's sit down with your friends and talk about your life trauma. That would be probably more like there's probably games that could do that. This isn't it. This is more about like here's some of these concepts and what they could look like in a fictional sense, in this sort of like surreal, almost like instead of it being an internal embodied like self like work you do with self and with others, it's actually like let's look at that in a sort of like this these the PTSD demon is a thing that's happening in front of you. It's a situation and it has a core, and you're trying to as you revisit it again and again, you're trying to sort of work in different ways of sort of like understanding it and integrating it and taking away its sort of like the embodied trauma response that it has over you. But in a again, that sounds quite dry because we're getting into the sort of like the underpinnings rather than just playing the game. And I think if you're just
Yeah,
playing the game, it's it's like, hey everyone, go play my game. That
it's
that's
very
not a
interesting.
good pick.
It's I've like I know it does make sense that stuff changes at least in how it
Mm,
comes across when you're talking about like the skeleton as opposed to seeing the person. If I'm using this
mm,
odd skeleton
mm.
metaphor I landed on.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
did mention a bit before the sci-fi because I think this was on mic. You were talking about was it the film called Hypercube or Cube Two or
yeah,
something?
yeah. Cube Two Hypercube is like a huge influence because like Cube, the first film, a little bit ableist. Let's be honest. Back it's a '90s film. Like we can't really say they didn't know better. They could have, but it was a far it's a better film than Cube 2 ever was. Cube 2 was just like it. I think that the worst bit about Cube 2 Hypercube is that it could have been a great film, and they just kept. For my someone out there probably loves it and is sitting there yelling at me at the moment through the ether. But I kind of felt like it was a film that just kept missing. It kept being like, oh, this is going to be really good, and then it was like, no, it's not. They've just kind of just skiffed it, and that's made it worse. It's like it was just like not. It wasn't a good enough film, and it wasn't a bad enough film to just be a really bad film. It was 2 stars rather than none or 5. And so that had always annoyed me, and there's always a bit of me like, you could remake this to be a really amazing film, because it's about people that have been trapped in a hypercube, and how they escape. Can they escape it? How can they escape it? It's like a bit horror movie-esque, but also it also has sort of ideas of sort of like conspiratorial stuff and sort of philosophical stuff that could, but all of it kind of just sort of doesn't gel very well. It doesn't really hit the mark. So yeah, this game is what I would have done if I were the writer on that film.
Yeah,
Kind
it's
of.
interesting cause like obviously lots of games people make are like, oh, this is a love letter to this thing, whereas this feels more like
Yeah.
this is a strongly worded piece of constructed feedback.
This is me if I were remaking it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
This
also think
film could
that's
be
also interesting.
redone.
It breaks things apart more in a way that's
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And like, so it's like got that. And like I said, Solaris came into it after like after the draft of the game that you'd seen. Um, Also, lots of quite surreal things. Like I'd seen recently, just in the midst of just before the Kickstarter launched for it, I went to see Ennis Main at the cinema, and had to go back like a couple of days later to see it again. It's sort of like a Cornish surrealist folk horror film that was out just recently. Um, it's spectacular. It's like one of the few films it's just living rent free in my mind.
mm,
Even or the Robin Williams film like What Dreams May Come, which is based on the book of the same name. But that's sort of like traveling through the realms of the realms of dream and after death, try and find to deal with the past, to deal with the trauma of the past, and to reconcile with it. And the sort of the short film Meshes of the Afternoon, which I think's like one of the most spectacular pieces of sort of filmed work ever, in my mind. It's just like it's like a dream. You're watching a dream. Um, and it has that same sort of dream logic, and it has just such stark images, and interesting images that yeah, it'll probably sit in my mind until my mind gives up. So yeah.
yeah. Do you consider the Connection Machine a horror game, or do you feel it's just very influenced by, or do you just think it's that horror as a genre is often the thing that's engaged in similar material and different
Yeah.
directions?
Well, horror is such a big, wide field by
Mm,
itself. Like if you took something like, um, like if you took a hot, like in it, like take Ennis Main, which I just mentioned. It's labelled a folk horror, but it's not. It's not like jump scary horror. It's more surrealism, and it's getting bracketed under horror because that's where a lot of surrealist work lives at the moment.
mm.
Um, and I think that's so. I wouldn't call the Connection Machine a horror game at all, even though it has demons and replaying your history, and it could be seen as horror, I guess. But I also feel like I think it's more in this the sort of almost like the social science fiction camp for what it's
Yeah.
worth, or science fiction camp. It's definite. It's like it's even got hard sci-fi in there. A lot of the sort of ideas that I'm going to throw into the final document, with some sort of fleshing out some of the sort of background a little bit, not too much. It's a short zine, and it'll be about 44 pages. But it's like there is a machine called there's a supercomputer called the Connection Machine already. It uses
Oh
Tesseract
wow.
processors. Okay, and so a tesseract being uh, like a four-dimensional shape. It's just about
Mm.
the structure, the processors, and how they interact with one another, and how they're laid in a matrix. But that's the influence for the title of the game. It's because it's like the Connection Machine is this tesseract processor. So I was like, that was bubbling away in my head, because I was like, oh, tesseract, hypercube, four-dimensional shapes, like supercomputers, like what if this was more science fictiony? What if this is more using the science fiction to talk about, like all good science fiction, talk about like us now, like
Yeah. Like
yeah,
talk about feelings and the
yeah,
mind and
yeah, and who
I
we
mean,
are and where we're
yeah,
going.
it's a game with, even in the playtest version I saw, obviously knowing it will be much bigger, it's a game that to me just feels like it has an incredible amount of depth.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's really lovely to hear. I'm quite flattered. Thanks.
So we took a break because I said, "Oh, I need to go and get dinner," and now I've come back about 2 weeks later. It was a big meal. No, it was late at night, and then scheduling and stuff. So I'm going to get on to the rest of the questions I didn't that I missed off at the end of our last session of recording. But because it's been 2 weeks, has there been anything you've been up to, or any developments that would affect
Oh
our
no, no, no. Yeah, a couple. I don't stay still for long. One of the nicest pieces of news I've had was I was uh, given the Banquo Award for the Spirit of Scottish Gaming at the weekend just past. So this is awarded every year. Usually at Compulsion, Scotland's oldest running or longest running convention at this point, but it's sometimes awarded elsewhere depending on who's receiving the award and how. But the idea is it's awarded to somebody who has exemplified the virtues that we would like to see within the gaming sphere here in Scotland.
That's
And
dead exciting.
it really is, because like I didn't expect it. I've got quite a lot of projects on the go at the moment that maybe it would have been something further down the line, is how I think about it. But the shadowy cabal who decide these things said that it is now time. So
They looked at you and were like, "No, you've arrived now.
yeah, yeah,
You're
it's
just
like everybody who's won it in the past, like going back, like everyone that I know on it. There's some folks that I'm not as familiar with, but out of everyone I know on it, they're all like, it's like I'm standing on the shoulders of those giants. You know, it's how I think about it. I look at the people there, and I think back to when, like, the advice that they've been giving me for like 10, 15 years at
how
least.
long? How long running is the award?
I don't know. I'd have to look back. I think it's been running now for maybe about. Let's see if the viewers can
No, yeah, no,
wait one
sure.
second. It goes back to 2004.
Wow, yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
awesome to be like tapped in and accepted into like a tapestry almost of history of like gaming in Scotland.
Yeah, 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 definitely. It's got like so many people that I have so much respect and like true love for, and that sort of like I love everything they do. I think they're good people. I'm just like I'm in really good company. Like and it's people that I've like like I say, that have helped me along the way, or I've been in the sphere of. Like I've been like one of the first people I came into contact with when I was doing LARP stuff was Sean Maguire from Ski and More. He's one of the first people in the whole of the UK to try and make LARP kit in a commercial sense.
Oh, wow.
Um, we've got like designers like Morgan Davey and Malcolm Craig, and like like Gregor Hutton. Got amazing artists like Dave Alsop or like John Hodgson and Paul Bourne. And and also like podcasters like, do you know like stuff by Bez, like Bez who does the games design stuff at all? Like
Yeah, that
maybe
sounds
maybe not.
familiar, but I'm struggling to place
Yeah,
name
yeah.
person.
Anyway, that's all people who I have a lot of love for, and to be to be sort of named alongside them is, I'm blushing right now.
It's yeah, I can see how happy and it sort of clearly touched it. That's
Yeah,
really awesome news.
Kayla,
I
Kayla,
also
yeah, I
I
heard some
also
news.
I mean I also I guess like this is the day we're recording this. The finalists for the Deanna Jones Emerging Designer Award came out.
Oh
And
yeah,
I was one of those finalists, which is also very cool and exciting.
that
But
now that is huge.
yeah, it
Honestly.
still doesn't. No, it does feel very huge. It almost still doesn't feel real. Is why I feel like I'm talking about this in a way like it's really matter of fact. Like, oh yeah, this happened. I guess. I don't think it's entirely sunken in and everything. But no, that is really cool. You mentioned the Banquo to me off air. And it was only when we were speaking on air that I suddenly realized Banquo, spirit of Scottish gaming. That's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
it's took me the second go around to catch that. It's a good name.
Macbeth had the same problem. Don't worry.
Oh, that's good. Well, where we left off, at the before the I was going to say before the break, which but before the little musical interlude I'll use to stitch things together. You've been talking about one of your most recently kickstarted game, The Connection Machine.
Mm.
I wanted to then ask some questions about an earlier game, or like comparatively earlier game of yours called Be Seeing You. Would you just, for the
Oh yeah,
benefit
yeah.
of the audience, I don't know, do I guess
Explain.
like the pitch for Be Seeing You, just so some
Okay,
of my
the,
questions make sense
the
for
quickest
people who are
pitch
less familiar.
is, oh yeah, yeah. The quickest pitch is like The Prisoner, the role play game, like the '60s TV show. But it's kind of more than that. Um, it, it it started life that way, and then as I was designing it, became more about the similar themes, but taking a different angle on them. So it's within the same. It's in conversation with The Prisoner so much as sort of like just a direct clone of it. So it's about basically the group have a collectively controlled character who will only be referred to as the prisoner, who has been snatched away from the everyday life and then is transported mysteriously to a micro state called the village, uh, where they're under constant surveillance and a lot of pressure to reveal information about their life before they were transported there. And that unfolds. It has sort of a narrative arc that allows that to unfold in a sort of episodic format at one point before it comes to sort of like a boiling point climax. And then at the end, you do a bit of work, like post game, sort of sit down and talking about, well, what did this mean? What did that mean? How does this feel? Like it sort of opens up the questions, but lets the group, it leaves big blanks, those creative voids for the group themselves to sort of talk about the questions and come up with their own answers and to feel it out for themselves. So it's
Is that
yeah.
in the way, it feels almost in the way that how a lot of TV shows that have sort of clear lineage to the prisoner, I suppose I'm thinking, I guess, like sort of
Mm-hmm.
mystery box kind of shows where it's like those
Mm-hmm.
answers are left open there in the similar way of
Yeah.
like you don't necessarily get this clear cut thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like while the prisoner is the main sort of influence there, if I was looking at film and TV, I was also sort of taking on board aspects of um, the film Stalker, or the TV show, the UK version of the TV show Utopia.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I loved the UK Utopia.
yeah. And also like even like some ideas from like Neon Genesis Evangelion. Um, is a sort of like some of the sort of end episode, the sort of end last episodes, and what was going on there, and those sorts of ideas of self. And the real sort of like core of it that I went to was I wanted to talk about. I wanted questions to be opened up about what it means, what individualism means in the face of uh, like the state apparatus, like surveillance states, information society. What does can one person effectively do anything against that, or what does individualism mean within that? Because the prisoner talked about it in this terms of just like the individual versus the collective, and I sort of wanted to reframe that in terms of the the individual, the collective, and the sort of the existing superstructure that we're within,
Yeah,
sort of capitalist society today.
I remember you saying just now. You said just now about how like the game, like that's the main influence, and it also kind of became in conversation with it. And I was
Mm,
thinking because I wrote an adventure for Orbital Blues, which was like a
mm,
very direct pastiche of the film The Third Man. And I was talking
mm,
about like pastiche with a friend of mine. I was like, oh, well, it kind of turns like the act of play into an act of commentary, kind of even if you've not even
yeah.
engaged with the original media,
Hmm.
almost unwittingly, because it's like my example was just in this situation, like, oh, well, so much of the film, The Third Man, relies on like these things about the main character. The fact that the main character will not be the same, there will be these created player characters who will be very different, sort of becomes a commentary on what worked about that. And there it's like, I was thinking about that when you were talking about how, you know, the prisoner and other sort of influences you've mentioned, you know,
Mm,
Utopia, I think V for Vendetta may be listed in the book,
yeah,
like
yeah,
politically minded, but the game does feel more like its engagement is definitely like in conversation or interested in questioning what the sort of like
yeah.
ideology of those things
I,
is, rather than just replicating like vibes or
yeah.
something.
On one hand, I don't want to just replicate what's already came before. Like it's that thing that like I was reading Vincent Baker talking about how his on his blog how he didn't see Apocalypse World as a genre emulator. He's literally creating a piece of work. Him and Meg they created a piece of work to put that was part of the genre.
Mm.
It's a new piece of work. It's a new perspective, and I fully that's kind of where I was coming at it from with Be Seeing You as well. I've got like in the influences list, which I mentioned on the first half. I put in all my work. I try and list what where I come from with things. Um, it isn't just those film and TV sort of things. I put like graphic novels, books, short stories, art, music, but I also had a big list of the sort of the political influences that
Mm.
I took from it. Um, and so we've got a sort of mix of stuff from like uh, like working class history blogs, and um, like the current anti-raids network in the UK, and things like the cam over games over in Germany, where they you would set up a team and try to destroy as many CCTVs within a set time as you could to score points. And the No to ID campaign that ran in the UK during the early years of the New Labour's administration. Um, and so a whole bunch of other stuff as well. But like I try and say like these are things that have influenced the writing of this, and sort of like give a perspective and a bit of depth if you want to go check it out. And I also list a bunch of like other websites and other
Yeah, I
games.
really, I really like seeing like big lists of inspirations because it often feels like it offers almost like a glimpse into a thought process, but also in a way that is not that I'm not all like not in everything. Some things are more obvious, and other things like makes me think more about the game. Where I'm like, if I'm
Hmm.
familiar with something, I don't know, the inclusion of Utopia, for instance, in this made me think
Yeah.
about like, oh yeah, I can start to see pieces there, and I can think about how Utopia and the Prisoner and other things actually all fit into this are all sort of works in conversation with
Yeah.
similar things. And being able to see like those sort of I don't know threads or stuff.
Yeah.
It's
It's also.
it's it's part of what I like about
Hmm.
this podcast is sort of like tugging on those
Hmm.
threads
Yeah.
essentially.
Well, that's what I like about like for the podcast, going back and looking at the influences page of Be Seeing You. It's interesting to like look at it now, like a bit of time on, and think about how the different influences were in conversation internally with myself or within the game. Like I don't know if you were like after like 9/11, the government in the UK issued to every single household a sort of little pamphlet, a sort of little like pamphlet called "Preparing for Emergencies." And
Oh my god,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I was
and
6, so I didn't know this, but
yeah, look it
what?
up if you go to my game and just download the PDF. There's a link to the original there. Somebody's archived it, thankfully,
I just
and have a read through it. Have a read through it. Look at the graphic design, and then look at Be Seeing You, and you'll see just straight up like what influenced me there. But like it's yeah,
that's
it's like
wild.
thinking about how preparing for emergencies. Utopia came out after that,
Mm,
and the way that what was going on around it, like what they were both responses to events going on in the world and people's paranoias and people's like uncertainties and worries, and the ways in which like superstructural elements like the state were trying to keep everything in check.
yeah.
Uh, and so it's yeah, you throw in a little bit of like manufacturing consent and Stephen Luke's power, and you boil it up in a pot, put it on to simmer, add some herbs and spices.
There was something I noticed on my read through, and I remember thinking about it when we were doing the sort of first half of the episode because we were talking about like the
Hmm.
art being blown up um,
Oh yeah.
for the exhibition.
Hmm.
I put a real sort of exhibition on that. But with the exception of the sort of little portraits of the narrator, I remember thinking that the art does feature lots of people who are looking, but are never directly looking at the
Hmm.
viewer. Like it, to me, created
Yeah.
when you were talking about paranoia there, this atmosphere of I'm being watched or I'm being watched around, but I'm not being
Mhm.
seen. I
Yeah,
was wondering,
yeah,
I guess,
yeah,
how sort of
absolutely.
was that part of the influence from the being safe pamphlet, or like the feeling that
Well,
maybe created?
I think my general feeling about the sort of prevalence, especially in the UK, but now increasingly so elsewhere, of like CC, well, going beyond CCTVs, just that that to engage with the popular mainstream society is becoming more and more uh, required to like engage with applications which are constantly tagging and checking your like where you are and building a profile in the background of a complex profile of who you are. And that's the sort of like stuff that came with like the it was Cambridge Analytica, wasn't it? The
Yeah.
Yeah. So the big story there, in a lot of ways, isn't just like they have been swaying like elections and working to do that, because that's their whole thing. That's what they're selling. It's the fact that you can. How do you get away from this? They're using every possible technical trick in the book to build a very accurate profile of you, and then use that to have predictive knowledge about what you will do under certain circumstances. Like, and not you, just me, Tanya, the one Tanya individual, although they are kind of aiming as close to it as they can get, but also all the people in your sort of social category or with similar profile, how if we can sway a large enough percent of that, how will that work? And so the fact that these companies can do that, and that's their entire, they're very rich, and they're shaping society as a whole, and you being used to keep a sort of like a sense of control. Like one of the final questions is like, what in the game was control? Control's constantly being mentioned in the background or talked about, but never directly seen. And so, like, these sorts of ideas of like thinking about what we mean by power, and what we mean by influencing people, and what we mean by control. Like I could let you in on the secret of Be Seeing You, the big dark secret at the heart of the game, if you like. Just you and me, nobody else. Nobody's listening in, are they, out there? There's no microphones here. So yeah, the big secret is just us two people chatting. The big secret is the game's sort of token mechanics. I purposefully broke them. They don't really work. The game's actually junk in places. Not in an unplayable, this game's awful sort of way, just in a, it doesn't really, is it meant to work this way? What's going, I'm moving the tokens, I'm doing what I've told, I've been given instructions about when to move tokens. But the game could have been, like, it's diceless, it's a token economy. It could have just been a guided freeform game, because that's what keeps the game running, is the guided freeform bits of it.
But the token is a task you're being directed to complete, in spite of it not contributing to the running of the game.
Kinda, yeah. It contributes, and it makes you a little confused and annoyed, maybe, or unsettled, but not in a way that would ruin the game. Just in a good friend of mine, I'm going to give a shout out to Emma Acosta, one of the best games designers in the world today. She played it and dropped me a message, private message, and it's like, Tanya, can I ask you a question about Be Seeing You? I've just got around to playing it with some friends. I was like, yeah. She's like, the token mechanism, it doesn't work, does it? And I was like, no, it doesn't. And she's like, I thought it was on purpose. I was like, yeah, very much so. Just go think about it. I have been. I'm like, that's all I wanted. Like, it helps set up the question on a more, rather than just sort of be like, this is a question, go think about it. It's like, this game makes you feel it out by the way you're playing it, and then sort of like leaves you to think about what's just happened. And sometimes it'll hit and sometimes it'll miss, like any game, but I think if I've done my job right, it should be okay.
Yeah, but it's a really interesting application of like bringing mood and atmosphere by just like the way, I was going to say by the way a mechanic functions, but realistically what I mean is by the way a mechanic doesn't function.
Yeah, or by like, and it'll be different at every table. Some tables will look at it and then go, this isn't working, let's change it. There's actually a couple of ways you could change it to make it really smooth, and that's cool. I don't say not to. It's, once a game's out in the wild, everyone plays it their own way, and maybe that at the end conversation, that's something that comes up. It's like, oh, we changed this. It's like, oh, you did. So you collectively worked together in conversation and you manage to change that superstructure. Oh,
Interesting.
that's interesting. Whereas individually, you couldn't do it, and with what was being imposed upon you, it was uncomfortable. Hmm.
Mm.
But again, that isn't a guaranteed outcome of it. I'm
No.
not wanting it to be just like, hey, here's a fucking lesson. I want it to be like, here's a game, play a game, and then like maybe it makes you feel something.
Yeah.
Wow.
Be Seeing You as well has a sort of built-in episodic structure, and obviously a lot of
Hmm.
its core influence of the Prisoner as well as some of the others belong to like TV shows specifically. Do
Yeah.
you think of the game, or do you think of people playing the game? Do you imagine them engaging it like with the game and play it almost as in visualizing a TV show? And I
Yeah.
guess I was thinking, yes, is that? Do you feel different to the connection machine? Because I feel like if I'm visualizing
Yes.
narrative structure, I'm imagining closer to a movie, but also maybe more
Yes.
to a dream.
Yeah, I think the narrative structure is very much different between the two of them. Yeah, the BCNU has a very set narrative structure based around, like say, certain televisual tropes and certain ways of constructing those episodes. And yeah, the connection machine is a lot more about a feeling. Like just getting into the sort of like dreaminess of it all. Um, Getting into allowing yourself to sort of embrace some of the sort of weirdness and contradiction, and just sort of float along with it a little. So yeah, I guess if I was comparing it with other media, I guess like maybe it is closest to having a dream, or uh, like cinema can get there. Surrealist cinema, definitely.
Mm.
And you can have sort of surreal television that can go into that space, and definitely other like traditional art forms. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's, I guess,
music.
also thinking about form and media and the
Hmm.
interaction of that thing. I guess, like, the fact that,
Hmm.
like, television in the 60s was, like,
Hmm.
the aim usually was, like, for syndication, and the aim was repetition and stuff, and that, like, mimicking that, it feels to me like it would be harder to capture this feeling of being trapped in an attempt at control in
Well,
a, not necessarily, maybe hard is the wrong word, but like I feel the same about mimicking that episodic structure. Kind of, to me, it links to that theme of the fact that
hmm.
like the the character is stuck in a loop which they need to break. They need to almost
Yeah,
end the show.
yeah. Well, that's kind of where, when you think back on the prisoner, it's sort of end point, the fallout at the end. Um, it went into that sort of very dreamy, very sort of almost nightmarish space, and obviously the sort of famous climax of that with the masks and the rocket launch, and then being back in London. Um, hmm. But I don't know. Like I think there is there's great, like there's artistic ability anywhere to do that. Like
Mm.
you can end up with telly that is just like it's season 79 of The Simpsons, and Homer's head is become disembodied and is floating about the town, shooting everyone with laser eyes because they've just run out of stuff to do. And like, it's like I found out the other day. I had no idea that South Park was even still like a thing, airing
Yeah, was
episodes,
South Park
new ones.
consistently a thing, or did it break and come back, or has it just been
I
a thing this entire time?
I don't know. But the thing is,
I don't know
I
what I'd
don't
find
care.
scarier. Yeah.
It's 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 its relevance to me is it, is was it. is so long past that I'm
Yeah.
just like, okay, doing a Warhammer episode. Okay, I really don't care. Like, this is how I found out. Someone mentioned it. I'm like, what?
And you're
Okay.
just like, South Park, a thing that exists?
Yeah, yeah. It's like,
That is. Do you, we're thinking, I guess, about like play structure almost, for
mm,
lack of a better phrasing.
mm,
Maybe that's a good phrasing. I have no idea.
mm,
Um, do you feel like you come to like sort of conscious decisions with that? Obviously, with B seeing you, that does.
yeah,
You are explicitly invited. Do you feel that comes like early in
yeah.
the process? Yeah, is it often like a sort of core part of
I
the game?
how I come at designing games. It's probably a bit like, I don't know. I don't know. Every designer is different, and a lot of people, I think, especially because I help host sort of like spaces which help people who are like maybe sitting down to try and design a game for the first time, and they often come at it with a, I need a I need a core mechanic. I need this. I need the, and that's, some people get like inspired by a mechanic and then can spin out from that. Um, and I think how I come at things from is, I usually come at it with some sort of, I go back to sort of like the classic "what's this game about" type thing, and I have some sort of idea bouncing about my head. And I think we talked about this in the first half with the connection machine, where I had like just things bouncing about and all these different ideas, and they coalesced into something. But then I usually sit down and sort of go, can I just do this as like a guided freeform game in some way? Like, does this need any more mechanics than maybe some scene framing? How do I frame scenes, and how do I pick? When does a pick, a choice have to happen that is mechanical rather than just people agreeing it?
Mm.
Okay, when does a game start happening? Because before there's mechanics, like if we're just sitting about having a conversation and nothing else, that to me is sort of like the borderline where you're in the fuzzy zone before you hit a role play game.
Mm.
The role play game begins when these mechanics will take it in like weird and wonderful new directions for you all. Um, and so maybe I look at stuff like, I'm a big fan of Jason Morningstar's The Skeletons,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, and just that sort of like, that's a great example of like, when you get to this, you just pick something from a list, and then you've got these framing devices all around it, and that, like, that's the mechanism there. But yeah, I start from that, and then I'm like, if it's not satisfying to me, that's when I start maybe playing about with tokens. I'm like, oh, can we have some sort of bidding mechanic here? Can we have some sort of, what do we want to do? What do I want it to feel like? And then it's like, how does this feel like when I'm playing it? Or maybe just like play a scene out, or try a little something, or play about with some dice. And like, dice usually come after I've sort of exhausted no dice. I usually, or like, the reason I put dice into the connection machine, um, was because it had, for me, it had to represent the capricious nature that was outside of the player's hands.
Mm.
The way in which, um, like, past memories and the things that you were brought up in, and the ways in which you've learned, like, you've become habituated and embodied the memories, and how you try and forge connection with others, how that sort of has this, a part of it is not directly, it isn't your conscious self, or I don't like conscious self, but it isn't what you want in the moment directly, if you were to be able to sit back and look at yourself remotely.
And so
And that,
having those decisions come from like agreement rather than randomness would almost be creating like a disconnect between the players and the characters.
yeah, it would like, having the dice come into things makes it something. Like, the classic one is like, oh, I had an unfortunate conversation online recently, as you sometimes do online, where someone was kind of trying to explain. At first, they were like, unless there's dice being rolled or a randomizer, then it isn't really a role play game, which I was very much opposed to. And we had
Yeah.
a civil conversation, but it was kind of, I've kind of had this conversation a lot over the years, and it's kind of tiring at this point for me. I'm getting too old, um, and but it's sort of that idea of like, well, no, it's they add a different element. It's a certain style. When I sit and put dice into my game, I do it because it feels a certain way, and so
Rather than fulfilling a tick list for something to justify
to
being a
be
role playing game.
yeah. I'm uninterested. It's like what I don't need. Yeah, so it's and I don't pick a dice mechanic because it does one thing or other. I'm very rarely interested in something where I roll a die and on a heads I win, on a tails I lose. I roll a die and I turn it into a coin because it's just the same. You're
Mm.
just rolling the dice. You add in a stat and a skill, and then I win, huzzah, or I lose, boo. And like that's great. Like some folks like that, and some. But for my games, I'm not really into that. I'm more into if there's a success and fail, it's more about like the different pathways, the different ways in which it will frame the scene, and the different prompts that it gives you.
Yeah.
Um, and I really love games where it's sort of like you roll and you get to then it tells you who chooses whether you succeed or fail. Like if I get the die roll and it's above a certain level, I get to decide. But if I lose it, maybe another player or the GM or something gets to decide the narrative outcome. And yeah, things that play with how you're going to frame scenes and
Mm.
what what happens, because at the end of the day, a role play game is just a conversation that is occasionally interfered with by the game part, and even like your most like like middle of the road standard like play by the book Dungeons and Dragons game is that you're literally role playing characters. The fight scene breaks out, you play your little skirmish war game, and that mediates what happens after that like during that for the narrative, but also coming out from that, what you then have to narrate and what you have to do and what your choices are, because our wizard got bashed up pretty bad and is out of spells, and our thief is sort of like doing okay after doing all the backstabs, and like so what are we, and the fighter needs to rest up, all that kind of stuff. It's still it's maybe not the sort of game I'm interested in playing these days, but it still fits into that loop of conversation about we've engaged with these game mechanics and now we narratively have to do something.
Yeah. Speaking, it's like talking of narrative and this, like, just because you mentioned going to wargaming mechanics here, this might be a
Mm,
good place to shift into
mm,
talking about Low Light Dread Empire, which is a narrative war game, right?
yeah,
Is that correct? Yeah. Do you want
yeah,
to
yeah. Tactical
tell?
role play game, narrative war game, whatever.
Yeah. No, Low Light Dread Empire was your first collaboration with Julia, if I'm correct, right? That was
Yeah,
how you
yeah,
first, yeah.
yeah.
And
That was the first.
yes, how what was the initial inspiration point for the game? Like, where did it start beginning?
Um. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so it really traces back, going back a long way to maybe about close to 15 years ago now, probably just under, or maybe about 10, 12, something like that. Who knows? The old story games forums, which sort of in the early 2000s, is a story games forum which had lots of chat, design stuff, just interesting, interesting take about what was then the sort of like the indie slash story game boom that was happening. Um, and it had lots of interesting ideas. And one of the threads that came out on there, used to just mainly lurk, occasionally post, was it was talking about if uh, if D&D is sort of like evolved out of or was designed out of sort of a wargaming background, both historical war games and the sort of like the sort of Brownstein and like Blackmoor type stuff. Um, they came those early sort of like role play games from that area of design were sort of like related. What would it look like if we took the current what was then the current wave of story game design, which had very distinct differences from the trad design sort of ethos, and then we backwards engineered or tried to work out what a war game made using those design principles? What would that look like? So I think there may be two different threads within the same year talking about this, and it just sat there in my brain like, what would a story game derived war game look like? And that bubbled away, and over the years I'd occasionally go and play about with this project, and it eventually kind of sort of clicked into place. There's a lot of different things that sort of led it there, and so yeah, that was where it started. I guess it got a kick up the bum from the pandemic,
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
it's just like my it's a little bit of catharsis, just looking at the world and looking at what was happening and sort of going, ah, like
it's like a furious game is my
yes,
view, and I mean that with like the most
yeah.
praise, to be clear,
Oh
obviously.
no, I'm 100% with you. Yes, it is about the whole the death cults of capitalism, like having won, the world being ground down in endless toil, the end of living resistance, but then them destroying so much that reality itself starts to break down, and the undead rise up to tear down capitalism. Like, it's grim. It's just like, it's all those ideas of grimdark. The idea of like cranking it up beyond 11, just and there being like it being really horrible. Like the good guys, the hope of this is sort of like undead and kind of like all that we have to hold dear to now has been sort of taken from our ideals and taken away from what we'd hope. So
yeah, it's engagement. It's interesting doing sort of a sometimes engagement with like the sort of formalist element of what would like a story game, sort of derived war game, look like, while also engaging with like what to me feels like a not that I am super familiar with grimdark aesthetics and such, but that feels like coming at those from a similar sort of different, like, oh, what if the seed is different? Is at least the perception it can sometimes feel like to me.
Yeah, well, I definitely like there's definite parallels with sort of the sort of grimdark as Games Workshop as the sort of progenitor of the term would present it. They've sort of in some ways kind of keep forgetting that they're doing a nod and a wink to it, and sometimes it's that thing of like, what is it? I can't remember who said this. I think it was Stuart Lee saying if Jim Davidson can take a comic who thinks they're being progressive and take that ironic joke and then repeat it, and just on face value, then maybe you should get new material. And it's I kind of feel that's Games Workshop these days. It's like, oh yeah, we don't like fascism or any of that. And it's like, okay, but why do all these space marines look fucking super heroic and they're always the sort of like they're not good, but they're the good guys there, right? Okay. oh, they're troubled, or they do something nasty, or there's something that shows they're wrong, but there's still your main point. Like you still like to put them there as sort of like troubled, worried guys. Oh, I am the Lord of the Ultramarines, and I'm worried about this. It's really, and it's all, yeah, my empire's bullshit. But I'm still in charge of an empire, ain't I? Oh, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Fuck off, Games Workshop. Like I want to go back to days where they'd show a picture of Space Marine and he's got foam at the mouth and he's got like these bolts in his skull and he's looking just like, and he's chopping stuff up and it's horrible. Like those are the days when my mum would like got hold of one of the books and was like sat me down and was like, you know, this is like Nazi imagery, and I was like, yeah, mum, they're taking the piss out of it. And she looked at it and could see on face value, oh yeah, this is using it and it's talking about it in a really negative light. And
And you feel like you might not get, would find it hard to imagine a similar experience with modern.
I think while it's there, like there's not the whole there's no good guys in 40k sort of is true. It's very true. But at the same time, they do like that money that comes from being a little bit ambiguous. So on one hand, we'll put out a statement saying, "Oh, fascists have no place in our hobby" and what have you. But then here's a book about this heroic, genetically modified super soldier who's really fucking cool and can kill loads of people. Because that's the thing with fascists. Like, they don't really care if you say that, oh, this guy's the bad guy. What they care about is that guy the powerful guy?
Yeah, it's very easy for them to just decide the perspective on good or bad that the person saying it has is wrong.
Yeah, like I can watch a piece of media and go, oh, that guy is a fascist. They're obviously saying he's an arsehole and he's bad. But then and then folks like get all galaxy brained and quizzed out about, well, why a fash on these sort of like 4chan and that? Why are they all creaming their pants over this? That it's obviously saying that they're fucking dickheads, and it's like, well, yeah, I've got very sweary tonight. Tonight's a sweary night. Sorry, viewers.
We're letting loose. We're letting loose in here.
Loose, yeah. it's yeah, after dark. Yeah, like why are the fash and the far right and the alt right and whatever they want to call themselves this week? Okay, like turf, whatever. Like, why are these people looking at these powerful characters who are being portrayed negatively and still loving it? And you have to understand they don't care about that. And this has real world implications. Like that's a media sort of representation. But if you remember, folks can remember back. I don't know, some folks will, and some folks this will be new to. Question Time, which in the UK is like a weekly show where you get on some politicians and some talking heads and maybe a comedian who's able to take the piss out of them and tell us the truth. Maybe a poet that knows, that isn't just sort of like talking out their bum. You get people who know on the show, and they talk about the matters of the day. And one time, maybe about 10 years ago now, bit under, they had Nick Griffin, the leader of the British Nationalist Party, BNP, and basically a fascist political organisation at the time. And they had him on, and the BBC's line as well, if we put him on, he'll have his say and he'll get argued down, he'll look like a minority position, and it'll be terrible, and like it'll show him what for. And that's because they're not thinking in the way the fascists are thinking. Like, the fascists are thinking, Nick Griffin got on telly and got to have his say. That means it's okay, it's now normalised for us to have our views in the public sphere. We can't just sit at home stewing about why why all these this and that's moving in around me, all these degenerates and all these horrible, like, they can't just sit and stew about that at home. They're now allowed to bring that out into the public sphere. And there was all this lauding of, oh, Nick Griffin went on and he looked abysmal, and there were loads of zingers against him, and the person that was on the panel really owned him, and this other person owned him, and the person in the audience owned him, and all that. It's like, yeah, that's true, but the party membership for the BNP went up 400% overnight.
And hate crimes increased, I seem to recall,
Yes.
every time
Yeah,
he
I
was
was
on
just going to go
TV.
into that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so his message, it doesn't matter that it's being like made fun of there. He's got what he wanted. He wasn't there for that, and this just keeps repeating. And we see it again. We see it today. It's like, oh, we've got to have a debate on about trans people. Oh, fuck off! I don't remember having any say on whether what visibility was going to mean. If
Mm.
I didn't want that. I wanted like, I know, like, a more transliberatory approach. I think that the problem with the current here I go. I've got my soapbox. Problem with framing things as trans rights and the language of trans rights is we're falling into the same trap that previous generations have fallen into. That basically we're fighting on ground that isn't the ground we actually want to win, because what we're fighting for is for the state to be able to say what we are and to legitimize us, or to delegitimize us and to have that say. And that's this happened. The previous wave of this happened with like same-sex marriage, and so
Yeah, I mean, I feel
that
like,
mm,
under 10 years ago, arguments around GIST stuff were like, it was being pushed, in like, oh yeah, it should be easier. But also, I remember lots of people I knew being like, well, it's not very good that the government has a
no,
list of trans people. I don't want to
no,
be on that list.
no,
Um, and then it's, because it's been pushed then so far back, I feel like
yeah,
we've all sort of got stuck into going like, well, oh, okay, yeah, it should be easier to get on the list.
yeah,
The government
yeah,
kept list of trans people. I guess we all want to be on there.
yeah. And that's kind of it. Like, anything that's granted in that sort of sense um, can be withdrawn quite easily at a later date. Rights that seem really, really stable 10, 15 years ago look shaky as all heck now. Abortion access, especially here in Scotland, like, folks up here like to think we live in some sort of socialist utopia sometimes. It's very much not. Um, and the rise of like anti-queer across the board rhetoric being driven, and the anti-abortion lobby are driving an anti-trans message, because if you can start questioning bodily autonomy for one person, you can slowly start to expand that using the same arguments, because once people have bought into the sort of the full framework, you can push that apart. And so, yeah, like, all this sort of stuff, definitely Low Thy Dread Empire is like very much directly a result of all this happening in the world. The sort of way in which the the mechanisms by which the far right have become have brought their politics more into the centre from the margins. The ways in which that's been allowed to happen by capital L liberalism, and always would be, and the ways in which the sort of the struggles for that have to come from these sorts of more mass and liberatory perspectives, and the old sort of like hierarchical parties and that sort of thing, they always do devolve back towards some sort of authoritarianism, or some sort of we're back to control that isn't what we wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so yeah, I poured it all into a sort of a very over the top sort of deconstruction of a war game. Is it a deconstruction? Is it just a different way of doing it? I don't know.
It,
I don't
it
think it's.
feels like something I can This is I sometimes feel in this podcast I end up dwelling on metaphors which I'm like, I don't know if these make sense or are
Yeah.
useful in any context. I feel like it's a habit I've picked up from therapy, but I was gonna say like it feels like an engagement with wargaming where it's like models you see of person where they're just like musculature and the bone and
Yeah.
stuff. Like it's like
Yeah.
I don't know if it's deconstruction or reconstruction, but it's like I can see
Yeah.
the pieces and I can see how the body moves.
I've slagged off Games Workshop a lot there, but I also grew up with them very and as sort of like and the sort of ideas and this if you do read into the sort of the like take a bit of time to sort of get to where the design I think the designers and the writers are coming from with it, it's really interesting and really fascinating and can be quite subversive in some ways. And the I have a and I love narrative war games. I really love the story potential that they have, and that they live in that sort of liminal space between some sort of competitive or historical like set piece more like chess like war game, and the sort of like the space we inhabit as role play gamers. Um, I really think that it has a different sort of narrative flow, different structure, different sort of way of bringing story into things, and
Yeah.
it's just it's interesting. I recently joined a Discord server that is dedicated to making miniature games that don't include violence,
Ooh.
so non-violent war games, as it were. Um, and it's just fascinating. It's got all sorts on there.
This does how maybe just wonder, has anyone done anything using like games built around like dolls' houses? But also, I imagine dolls' houses are
Mm.
expensive in the same way other things are. So it would feel like a thing you'd only be able to sell to people who already collect and do that, which I
Yeah,
don't know
well,
anyone who does. But
you say that, but it's probably cheaper these days than a box of 20 orcs. So Games
true,
Workshop, at least.
yeah, I honestly have no idea because
Mhm.
it's otherwise that's never a thing I've ever known about. But
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
talked there about like Lola Dead Empire and being like the skeleton war against the death cult of capitalism, and like both the
yeah,
itch and the Kickstarter page link those phrases to like a drill tweet and an academic article.
yeah.
And I like that's such a fucking great pitch line, like skeleton war against the death cult of capitalism. But I was wondering about like the combining of influences that maybe on the surface seem far apart, and I guess I was also in like linking of conversations we've had about influences and spelling out calling out influences before
Hmm.
about the decision to hyperlink the pitch line to show the workings
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, well, I just like that. It's like it is because this it isn't coming from one thing. It's like we've talked about that with BC Need. Like it's about all these things that I as writer of this game have seen and taken in and have consciously bubbled up and while I've been doing this, and then they're obviously in conversation with each other, and I've created this game along with Julia doing the art, and we've been in conversation through the process of doing that. And Julia's got all of her influences and background and thinking and ideas and just brilliance. And so yeah, the idea of like linking a sort of more academic text with a surrealist Twitter post doesn't it doesn't strike a discord with me. It just tells me like this is both like when you read that sort of idea of like it's a game about it's obviously an anti-capitalist game. Like it's got those themes. So is it does that mean it's serious? Well, maybe, but it's like the skeleton war against death cults, and it's like linking to a tweet that says if you don't put R.I.P. on your grave, you'll get drafted into the skeleton war. Like, is it absurd and over the top? Kind of surreal, yeah. It's
Yeah,
all of these things.
and that feels. I guess that relates to another question because we talked a bit about like grimdark in terms of talking about Games Workshop, but I was wondering about your personal interpretation of that term, and it does feel like that linking of surrealism, and socialist thought feels like that's
Yeah.
built into what I at least see from reading through Low Light Dread Empire is your version of grimdark. Do you
Yeah.
what do you feel is that's true, or do you feel like there are other things that also define like your grimdark, as it were?
Oh, I guess there's the whole the 28 movement in war games at the moment, which has been going on for a good few years now, which is a sort of like a push towards away from commercial factors and towards your own sense of um, a personal style, a sort of dark personal style, but one that is it's really about customization and about a collaboration. And this 28 magazine has been sort of like come to the forefront of that, and they've had a very strong like they've been very vocal in their sort of like uh, anti-patriarchal, like pro-feminist and anti-fascist sort of politic that they hold a strong line on, and they've riled up a bunch of chuds who basically like they held like a they hold competitions within the wargaming space for like doing where you can submit art or miniatures or short stories or what have you. And they had a few of them, and they've done a make a female space marine, and in the law like there are none and all this, and it basically was like it was bait, it was pure bait to get to every bad actor came out of the woodwork when they did that, and it just laid it all in the like, let's take the masks off, let's see what's underneath. Okay, good guy, good guy, good guy, wank. Okay, that's it.
Yeah,
And so I guess they've been really influential, and also the other people working in that field, like Nick Evans, who does Mammoth Miniatures. His stuff with he does like these packs of like Planet 28 is one his main science fiction game. Brutal Quest for his fantasy one, and he does these little packs of like these games you could just play on a pub table, pretty much like these super giant mini games, which are like you basically have a little Ziploc bag, and it's got a few tiny wee dice in it, a wee rule pamphlet, and then like some either cut out standees, like little pre-made like tanks or people or what have you, and you can play a wee war game. And that's sort of like DIY. It's cheap entry, and you put in a lot more of your own creative self. And I
yeah,
think that lends itself towards a far more grim and dark game, but also one that's sort of like, I guess it has more integrity on a sort of like on a personal level. Like the people creating these things are able to be in conversation, and it allows for like this kind of gaming experiences I remember when I was younger. And we had like Games Workshop had the Realms of Chaos, these two big hardback tomes, and they had this narrative campaign where you'd play Chaos Warbands, and it was weird and a bit sort of baroque, and you had lots of weird stuff going on, and it was just really creative and engaging in a way that I don't get as much these days from the mainstream offerings, but I do get from other folks. And I find that I'm really really lucky, and I think anyone else can be this lucky as well, because we've locally got the Edinburgh Indie Gamers, and that is a games club that meets once a month in person now, with the sole sort of like remit of just playing nothing but small press or indie developed games. And that's because the clubs where sort of more mainstream games are played, it's sometimes hard to get people together to play those games. And so having a dedicated space for that's just been amazing. And yeah, it's really really lovely to see. Like, and the popularity just is built over the years, because it's something that my sort of relationship to the club is that way back at the sort of mid 2000s. Are we talking 2010 or something? It's not that way back, but it's a while back. 2011, something like that. Uh, I'd started a club in Glasgow because I was fed up of trying to pull people from like 5 different clubs across the city just to play one game of Fiasco, you know.
Yeah.
Like I'll go to this club and see who wants to play, and there's like one person. And I'll go to this one, there's 2, and then yeah. And so I basically just picked a day, took a big pile of my small press and indie stuff, and popped it down on the table in a pub where I said I'd be, and then we started playing games. And so that was how Glasgow Indie Gamers was born, and so that's how anyone else can do it. And if you want more than that, feel free to get in touch with me. But yeah, that spawned the London Indie Games Meet. Some people down there seen it happen.
Been to that. I didn't realise that was that.
So what happened is that the people who founded it messaged me and said, "Oh, is it okay if we copy this? And how did you do it?" And I told them what I just said there. I said I just booked a space, told everyone I was going to be there, and done it. And I didn't even book a room. I just had a table in a pub that I knew was kind of quiet on that night. And they done that, and it's been on the go. And like I hear, like I was watching like a con panel online a year or so ago where there's like a Hong Kong games meet that spawned from the London Indie Games Meet, and Edinburgh Indie Gamers spawned from people locally copying what was like, getting fed up with the local club and going and having their own games meet and seeing what London was doing. And you know, like it's just like it's so beautiful to watch that sort of domino effect out into the world and hear folks coming back. It's like, oh yeah, like this idea, you just have to sort of do it, and stuff will happen. And some things take root and some things don't. But yeah, if folks are listening,
it's always worth a punt.
Yeah, exactly. And if folks are listening, and if you've got enough, if there are gamers around about you, and you've got a local game shop or like local clubs or anything, or even just like putting up a flyer in your local library and saying, "Come try some games," like. Get a space and just do it. Just take down a bunch of books, and then the one that people pick up and read, and they're flicking through and looking at the art, and like just go, "Oh, we'll play that now," and do a one shot, because we just do one shots once a month, and it's people at the start of the night. People pitch games they want to run. Once all the pitches are done, everyone moves towards the person that's facilitating the game that they like the sound of.
Yeah.
And then if there's something that's got too many people or something that's got not enough, we work it out, and then 7 o'clock, sit down, play a game, done.
I always felt as a stand-up comedian, and I feel as a game designer now, and less so, but in a similar element with wrestling when I did that. Like I always felt I was better at like creating whatever the art was, whether that was comedy, wrestling, or game design now, if I was consciously engaging a lot. So it's like I feel like a better game designer when I'm playing more games, because I don't know, I just feel sort of tuned in that way. And I always felt like I had more ideas of doing like comedy, or ideas of things I want to talk about when I paid a lot of attention to comedy.
100%. Yeah.
And generally, obviously, it's hard in some cases, but I think that does show like the value, both to a design perspective, but also, you know, just like the other value is human connection and things.
Yeah. The real adventure is the friends you made along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Probably wrap up soon. What I was going to ask is, you know, is there anything exciting you're working on at the moment that you want to talk about, want to mention? And then ask that, and then I will also check in with where people can find you online. But is there anything you want to...
Yeah, so I guess there's a few things. Like Low Thy Dread Empire should be released by June.
That's huge.
That's close. Hopefully out to backers in June, and then July, August I'll start flogging it, you know. And I've got some ideas for supplemental material, or maybe even the preliminary chats have been had about making a miniature range to go with it.
Ooh, that's cool.
But don't hold your breath on that, because uh, it needs money for outlay and that kind of thing. And I'm an indie games designer, not.
Yes, I can see how that is also the kind of thing which goes on different
Yeah,
time
yeah,
frames to other stuff.
yeah. I don't have any money. I'm skint. In fact, I'm not even skint. I'm just swimming in debt. Send me money,
Oh yeah,
everybody.
feel that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cost of living crisis. The Tories really love Thatcher, don't they? They really
They
do.
love Thatcher
But
so
so do
fucking
but so
much.
do but so do the Labour Party. So do the
Yeah,
SNP. So
I really
well,
wish this country had anyone in influence who didn't just fucking love Thatcher's dead corpse.
yeah, yeah. Well, there we go. We just have to be the change we want to see, etc.
Yeah.
So there's that. So Low Light Red Empire. It's coming out. It's actually going really well. So for all the pessimism there, I'm really liking it. Connection Machine is. Don't tell the backers too directly. I'll tell them myself. But there's going to be. It's well ahead of schedule.
Ooh,
Testing on it's going well. The layout's about 50% done now. There's only 2 pieces of art needing to be finished for the art side of it to be done. It's like I'll send you over a wee draft copy. You'll like the look of it.
that's
Um,
really awesome. Yeah.
yeah. So that it's scheduled to be released in January, but I
Awesome.
think if I'm lucky, I might actually have it out in time for Tabletop Scotland in August.
That
Um,
is super exciting. So obviously, like
and
those are two of the games we've been talking about
mhm,
in depth on this podcast. So if you've liked the sound of them, you, the listener, should be on the lookout come
yeah, yeah,
January or maybe sooner.
yeah. I'll give you details on that in a second. So Tabletop Scotland, I mentioned.
Yes.
I'm heading. I'm heading up what is going to be called the Indie Connection, which is going to be a big mega booth with about, let me think, it's going to have 6, 12, 18, about 20 foot of frontage. And I'm pulling together indie designers from all over Scotland primarily. But also, I want to give space to folks from marginalised backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds, and uh, also especially folks who just wouldn't have the money to table at an event like Tabletop
Mm.
Scotland, because even a small table in a small pitch will cost you 100 quid. Okay, and I've been the designer that's just looked at that and went, I can't afford that. What the like some cons are like smaller cons, and you pop in at like 10, 20 quid. Zine fairs are kind of similar, but then the idea that like like UKGE and all that sort and Tabletop Scotland are meant to be bigger for as industry events rather
Mm.
than hobby events, and so they have that cost of entry. So I want to have this big stall where basically all the weirdos get together and we put out our wares, and yeah, it's going to be great. So the idea is folks will be sending me stuff, but also the other designers will be there for the weekend. We'll be flogging all our wares, and then after the fact, I've stumped up the cash in advance using said debt that I was just talking about, and yeah, you only live once.
Yeah, I
um,
get it. I get it.
yeah, I've only got kids to feed. Um, so you do that. Um, yeah, then basically once people have sold stuff, if they are selling stuff, if people are putting out free stuff, they just put out for free. We'll look at what people are taking. Like everyone gets to keep their profit. Like I don't touch any of it. No one else touches any of it. You set your price. You get your money. You keep it. But I'll also say this is the cost of. I've got a cost of the stall, a cost of an advert, and there's going to be some miscellaneous stuff. Like printing costs or whatever. There's going to be something that kind of thing come up.
Mm.
Cost. And so what I'm going to say is like, okay, what does everyone think is fair for each of you to chip in for that towards that cost based on what you've taken out of it? And I'm not, and it's just, I'm not going to ask for more than the amount that cost, and I'll be chipping in. So I'm not getting a free ride on it. If I've sold stuff, I'll chip in, but we'll do that collectively.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
how
going
the
to be
wrestling shows I used to be part of ran in a similar way.
yeah. Oh yeah, great. Yeah, so like going to do that as a sort of like another extension of this sort of like collective way of working, cooperative way of working, but also like bringing out sort of like marginalized and marginalized voices and people who just don't have access at all because of financial reasons, and
Yeah,
also like giving a boost to local designers that like folks outside of their games club might not have heard of, and they're making spectacular games.
yeah,
And
that's really cool. When is Tabletop Scotland? I realise I don't know.
August the 20th, in the 29th. Let me see, it's April, May, June, July, August. August the 25th to 27th. It's in Perth,
Nice.
Scotland, at the Dewars Ice Rink and Wibbly Centre. So, yeah. So I've got that coming up. I'm also I've finished designing, and I'm going to be putting together we talked about folk horror game Winter's Respite, so I'm going to
Yes.
be putting that together in a card game format. It's a
Ooh.
story game, but it's going to be as a deck of cards in the future. So that's the next game after I've got Connection Machine sort of pretty much down and dusted. I'll be trying to get funding for. I might do some fanzines in between just as a palate cleanser because it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
And then I'm also going to be applying for Creative Scotland funding for myself and a poet and a historian and Julia as an artist to work together and do a 6-month research for a project for something that I will turn into a role play game, but will also be an art exhibit with art, music, poetry, and fiction all sort of tied together. And that game's called Time of Tribes.
Oh,
And yeah,
yeah.
and that's where you can find me online, everybody.
Yes. So, what websites are you on? Because I think I messaged
It's,
you originally through Tumblr to
yeah,
talk to
Tumblr
you.
on Tumblr. Tumblr is because I had my Tumblr before my design alias. I have a different username there, and I'm not going to change it because I love it. It's Anna Cutie. Um, I'm never giving that one up until I feel I'm no longer cute and I'm as cute as a trap. I'm, I'm as I'm as I'm cute. I'm as cute as a sort of possum in a trash can. So let's go. Um, yeah. Um, so there's that. But my game Sona online is Time of Tribes, all one word. You can find me on Twitter, on Mastodon, on Itch. Go buy my stuff on Itch. Although, if you
Yes.
can't buy my stuff on Itch, it's all for free. I've put unlimited community copies of all my games, even the ones that are in development. So you can get a community copy now when it's still cheaper. The price will go up, the full version will come out, and you'll still have it. So go do that. I
Yeah.
don't.
But
Yeah.
also, if you can afford, just remember the
Yeah, yeah,
debt we've talked about.
yeah. Please, it'd be
Think
nice.
about
Just
the debt. Contemplate it.
can't, if you're in if you're in a decent place in life, and you even just for the you hate read my stuff, just throw me some money. I'll be okay.
But yeah, and then Time of Tribes. I'm excited to
Yeah,
hear more about that down the line because that sounds like a
yeah,
really
yeah.
cool bringing of game design into like physical space and
Yeah,
communities.
yeah,
Excited to see Low Light Dread Emperor and Connection Machine coming out in full because the as mentioned like in development like sort of drafts you can look at the moment are both really exciting, thoughtful sort of like I'm like avant-garde in some way like work,
oh,
which I think is really
thank you.
exciting, and I would encourage listeners. I have no viewers. I'd encourage listeners to check out.
Thank you. And coming from the Diana Jones Emergent Designer nominee, but also
Yeah.
just coming from you. But also before that happened, just coming from yourself, that's really lovely to hear. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank
I
you.
really,
Thank you for coming on the podcast. I've had a delight talking over these 2 sessions, free recordings because of our weird connection thing.
yeah.
I have not thought of a consistent sign off. Also, I've not yet thought of a joke one for this episode. I need to start pre-planning these because at the moment I'm just sort of sliding into them. I'm now like sort of frantically looking around my room for anything of inspiration, and the only thing I can see is a painting I did that was inspired by Seven Samurai. So my ending, my sign off for this episode, is that we didn't win. The farmers won. Until next time.